Hey everyone, welcome to the last video of the year. I am Federico, and oh man, I do look terrible, but that's what 6 nights in a row of non-sleeping baby will do to you, I guess. And in this video, I would like to show you a new set of objects that is introduced with Max 9, which is called the GTI library. So the GTI is this series of objects that allow you to create a graphic user interface in the rendering window, so in the JIT world window, in our 3D world directly. So this is something that you probably know best from like video games, where you open menus, you have options, you have an inventory maybe, something like that, and now you can do the same thing in Max using these GTI objects. So for example, here in this little demo patcher, we have a button. When I press the button, it sends a bang here in the patcher and it triggers something. And then we have some sliders. These two sliders don't do anything. And if I unlock the patcher, I go into edit mode, which allows me to edit the position and shape size of those UI elements. Okay, I don't want to get ahead of myself. If this sounds interesting, watch the rest of the video. And I'm pretty happy to show you this to you today, because this is something that I worked on mostly for Max 9. It's kind of my baby. So without any further ado, let's jump right into it and see what you can do with GTI. Okay, so let's start from this. I got a JIT world, a camera with anim drive, so I can move around in the scene using the keyboard. I got a jiggle grid shape, which is a cube, but is squashed, so it looks like a floor with a default texture attached. And let's see how we can work with the GTI objects. Now, the first one that we need is called GTI Canvas. That's going to be the canvas on which all the other UI objects are going to draw. So this, you can imagine, is like a layer on top of our 3D scene. So in order for the camera to work, it needs a name. So I have to give it a name, which I can just call it like my canvas. And the canvas doesn't do much. I mean, it does some stuff. We're going to see that in a second. But if we want to create an actual UI object, we got a bunch of them, as we saw. So let's see which ones we got actually. We got a button, we got a toggle, we got a slider, we got a number, and we got a group. These are the type of objects that we have. So let's start with the button, and all of these objects share a bunch of attributes, like the size, the position, all these sort of things. A lot of customization attributes they share. So we're going to use the GTI button as kind of our general example. But each of these objects, of course, has individual attributes, specific attributes to what the object does. So let's start with the button, which is kind of the simplest UI object of all. And if we just create it like this without any camera name, it will just look wrong. It will just be like a layer here in the scene, which is it's useless like that. So we need to give it the canvas attribute and give it the name of the canvas. So now the canvas is called my canvas. When I give it the canvas name, the object will appear in the scene. Now, the UI objects work like this. Like if this is a button, every time I press it on the rendering window with the patch locked, it will output a bang. Like if this was a normal button object, right? So this will output a bang. And if this was a toggle, this will output a 1 or a 0. And if it was a slider, it will output a number, but this we're going to see later. So for the moment, let's see what we can actually do with the object when it's in the rendering window like that. When we unlock the patcher, you can see that the object is now editable. So I can move its position with the center handle, or I can scale its width and height using the corner handles. Okay, so that's how the UI objects, you can either edit them with attributes, like I can set here the width manually and the height, or I can do the same using the mouse in the rendering window for fast editing. And one thing to note is that these measurements are in pixels. So you can see here it says 110px, this is the height in pixels, and this is the width in pixels, and this is the position in pixels. Because As we said, the GTI buttons live in this layer that is on top of everything, and they don't work in world coordinates. They work with the pixel screen coordinates. Let's write it down. Positions and sizes for GTI objects are in pixels. Cool. So if I lock the patch, I can then interact with the object. It means I can press it like if it was a max patcher. And when I unlock the patch, I can actually edit it. So another element that appears when I unlock the patch is this one here, which is called the anchor. Now the anchor works like this. Basically, the UI objects always will have the same distance in pixels from the anchor, and the anchor will always have the same position in the rendering window, independently of how big the rendering window is going to be. So for example, if I make my window like this, the anchor is always going to be in the center if it's positioned at 50-50% on the height and on the width. So it doesn't matter how big or what the size of the window is, and the object will always have the same distance from its anchor. So for example, if I place the anchor there on the left corner, the anchor will always be on the left corner of the window, and the UI object will always have the same distance from its anchor. So it will always stay there on the top left corner. And as you can see, UI objects don't change size when I resize the rendering window. They will always maintain the same size in pixels regardless of the size and shape of the rendering window, which is not the case with the normal GL objects. Like as you can see, the floor is getting bigger or smaller depending on the sizes of the window, but the UI objects always maintain the same size because this is like a user interface which needs to always stay the same size regardless of the size of the window. Of course, you can scale it according to the size of the window as well, but by default it stays the same size. Cool. So the objects are highly customizable. So let's check, for example, the help file from GTI button to see what we can change. And there we go. There is a tab called Appearance where you can see all the stuff that we can change. For example, the label color, the border color, the background color. We can add a shadow and we can change its color, of course. We can change the size of the borders. Border color we can change as well. We can just hide completely the button and just leave the label there. We can even highlight the object when the mouse hovers over the object, and then we can choose an highlight color and a bunch more. And all these attributes, these are common for all the UI objects, like position, scaling, appearance, and label. These are all common for all the GTI objects, button, toggle, slider, and so on. And then there is another tab usually in each help file which has the attributes for the specific to that object. So for example, the button will have a specific attribute for the color when the button is pressed, and a bunch of other things, but let's see actually these here in our main patch, so we get a bit more familiar with it. For example, let's change the background color. So there is an attribute called the background color, which I can just change, right? I can change the roundness of the corners of the button. So with the roundness corner attribute, I can go all the way to 1, which means that when the height and the width of the button are the same, this is going to look like a circle. So roundness of the corners, I can change the label, of course. So label, something like click me. And if I want to use more words, I need to place them inside these quotes. Otherwise, it's going to just use the first word and discard the second. Oh, and one thing I forgot to tell you is that from the when the patch is unlocked, I can press Shift and I can scale the button by clicking and dragging one of the corner handles, right? So in this way I can scale the border, the label, and the background at the same time, and the size of the objects at the same time by just scaling it all like this. I can change individually the border size, the label size, and the width and height, but if I want just to fast rescale everything, I can just press Shift and click. I can of course do that also using the scale attribute. So this does exactly the same. And I can change we can change the border size. Make it bigger or smaller. We can change the border color as we want. We can add shadow and all these sort of things. And one cool thing that we can do also is that we can use an image for the background of this button. There is an attribute called read image background, and I can just pass it the path of an image. So I can use, for example, the drop file object to just drop an image inside here and use it as the background. I can use, for example, one of the built-in images in Max, or actually these are some images from my library, but I can just drop whatever inside here. And if I change the background color to white again, this is going to be the original color of the image I passed in. Right. So we could, for example, just use the button just as a bit like a GTL video plane or layer when we just use it to display images in the rendering window. I can, for example, hide the border, hide the label with an attribute called enable label, and that goes away. And I can just use these as simply as a way to display this image on top of my 3D scene, for example. So that's something we can do. We can also use a texture for the background instead of an image. So there's also another attribute called texture background, and this takes a texture as input. So I can just create a GGL texture and just use the default image, which is going to be the checker pattern, and just send it inside there. Oh, and I forgot that I actually have to, I just have to root out actually the GGL texture. The GGL texture prefix from the texture name, because the message is actually texture background, not GGL texture. So there we go. Now we have we can use textures as well as background. We could use GGL BFG to create like a noise texture, and we could use it as well, like, so we could do something like that. Then we can change the background color to colorize this texture. Okay, so there is a lot of ways we can customize our UI objects. I have, for example, here a bunch of images that I downloaded from the internet, from the website of Kenny. And Kenny has this amazing website where he shares a video game asset for developers. And this is a package that is about UIs. I will put the link in the description for that. And it contains a bunch of images that can be used to create a UI. For example, here is a long button image, which I can just drop inside the drop file here and then use it as the background for the button. If I put the background color back to white, you will see that this is the original color of the image. And then I can reset the roundness of the corner. If I don't want to have the corners round, I can get rid of the border with the border attribute. We just disable the border. And now I just have this button. I can change, of course, also the font of the label. So I can, for example, go here on the help file, go in the label tab, copy the font selection snippet, and just attach it to the GTI button and just choose whatever font I like, whatever. Yeah, something like that. And then I can change let's change the label color, make it a bit more playful. Like this. I can change the font size without having to scale the whole, I could just scale the whole object and then just resize it to scale the label very fast. Otherwise, I can use the font size attribute to scale the label. And if I don't want the label to be like in the center of the button, there is another attribute which is label offset. And I can offset the position of the label in pixels. I can put it like on top of the button then. And this will always be at that distance from the button. I will just put it back in though. Now, if I'm satisfied with how the button looks like, what I usually do is click here on unlock the patch, click here on this triangle, go to transform and go to change attributes to arguments, which will basically hard code all the attributes that I've changed inside the object window. which is a great way to have it then saved for the next time you open the patch again. Oh, another interesting customization for the button object, this is specific to the button object, is that we can use a different color for where the button is when the button is pressed. So color button pressed, if I want it to be, for example, red when I press it, I can choose the color from here. But I can also choose a different image for when the button is pressed. So there is another attribute which is read image button pressed. And I can take one of the images, for example, here there is a button long brown pressed, so I can just use that one. So apparently when I press the button, it kind of, the shadow kind of disappears. In the image from Kenny, when you press the button, it also gets smaller because it gets rid of the shadow part, which doesn't happen in my case. It just keeps the same size. So what we can do, for example, is to manually resize this button when we click on it. When this is clicked, we can just set the height to something like 90. Oh, but this doesn't take, this is 90 multiplied then by the scale, which is going to be then 150. So let's scale it back and let's do like this. Let's actually increase the label size using the font size attribute, because I want to have the label a bit bigger. And let's bring it a bit down so it's centered. Let's go back here and again transform change attribute to arguments. And now when I click on it, it should go to height 75, let's say. And when I release it, there is not really a way to know when I release the mouse here. So we can actually use, for example, the mouse state object. And this will give us the state of the mouse. So this will be when the mouse is clicked here from the first outlet, if we set it to poll. So I can say, okay, if this was already banged, and for that we can use the one bang object. So if this was already banged, and this gives us a 0, which means the mouse has been released, then go back to height 80. Does this works? Yes. Just that the image button pressed didn't really change. So. Oh, and it's not really considering the image for the button press, and I wonder if this is because the texture background attribute is hard-coded here, which I actually don't want it.
Some time later.
Okay, so this was indeed a bug, which was a bit sneaky. So the thing was that when you set the height, it was reverting automatically to the background image. So it was not considering the button pressed image. So I fixed it, and this will be in the next max release. Sorry about that. So what I've done here, I also realized that I had to set the position when the button is pressed, because otherwise, without setting the position, it will just kind of slide down and then come back, because the image is smaller for the button press. So the new center is halfway through the smaller image, which is then different position than halfway through the bigger image. So solve that by setting the position manually. We should also set the offset of the label, but this is not like super important. You can do it as an exercise. One thing that I want you to notice is that I also unflagged the animate click attribute, because animate click, what it does, and let me create a new GTI button to show you. Canvas, my canvas. So what it does is that when you click the button, it gets slightly smaller to simulate like the button being clicked. But if you set the animate click to 0, then this doesn't happen. So I did that because I didn't want to have this animation, because the animation is already kind of the image itself. Or I guess you should actually go down the button to simulate that you are pressing it. So maybe it was okay like this. Yeah, so maybe I should have just set the offset of the label. Anyway, yeah, the bug with the image is still a thing, and it's going to be fixed in the next public release. Cool. So what I want to show you now is all the other objects that we got. We're going to make a lot more videos about jit.ui, because this was kind of what I worked on mostly for Max 9, and I want to show you exactly what you can do with it. So I will do a lot of videos about this, but for the moment, let's see what other objects we got. So we said we have the toggle, so canvas, my canvas, not my toggle. And there we go. Here is a toggle as well. When you click on it, it will output either a 1 or a 0, like a normal toggle, but in the rendering window. And you can, of course, you can like stretch it, you can scale it, you can change the label, and so on. What I like is that also has the live style toggle, which then behaves like a live toggle, which means it doesn't have the cross, it just has completely background. And you can, of course, choose images for the toggle press and toggle unpressed. And all this stuff you can check in the help file of GTUI toggle. Then we got GTUI slider. It's another good one. Canvas, my canvas. We just copy that actually. And this is a slider. So when you drag, it will output the number that you see in the window through its left outlet. And you can, of course, set the range. So there is a slider range attribute that you can set to whatever you want. And then you can just scale it, change the color, change the position of the label, change the position of the numbers, everything you want. Then we got the number, GTUI number, which is it's still kind of experimental, needs a bit more work because you can drag, but it's not like a flownum object really, the dragging experience. So it's there if you think you can use it for something, but it's not like super optimized. It'll still need a bit of work. And the number, of course, comes out here of the left outlet. And then we got GTUI group, which is pretty cool. Basically, the GTUI group allows us to group together a bunch of objects and move them and resize them and position them all automatically. So if I go like this and say group, my group, and of course, I should give it a name to this group, call it my group. So if I send to these objects the group my group, they will all go inside the group, and then they get like automatically repositioned when I resize the group. Let's maybe disable the labels because otherwise it's a bit chaotic. So enable label 0, cool. And so yeah, basically they get automatically resized. Let's create another toggle, for example. And you can create as many objects as you want. You can put them as many as you want in a group. And these, they get automatically repositioned. You can also then collapse the group with this button here, which is also customizable. You can choose your own images for the button. And you can choose the color of the background. And we're going to look at the group object in depth in future videos. But yeah, just so you know that it exists and what it does. You can, of course, check its help file to get a taste of what you can do with it. And the last thing I want to show you is how you can save the current state of your objects. So let's say that you have a beautiful UI that you carefully planned and made, and now you want to save the state. So one way, kind of the safest way, is to go with the transform change attribute to arguments, right? Otherwise, what you can do is to say write to the GTUI Canvas and load. And this will allow you to write a JSON file to your hard disk. And I already had one. And then when you want to recall the state of the UI objects as you have it now, even if you just reopened the patch from scratch, this will recall the state of the object. It's a bit funky with GTUI group, so I will not count too much on that. Maybe with that you want to set the transform change attributes to arguments. Otherwise, these will recall the state of all the other objects pretty faithfully. Another way is to use path storage and give it a name, call it like my storage, and a precept object, give it maybe path storage, my storage. And then you can create a path and maybe give it auto restore 0 because I don't want to restore automatically without the patcher. And then we can save the state of the objects as they are right now. We can modify them, save this as another preset, and then you can recall them as preset. And that also works if you close and reopen the patch. It should, at least. So since this is all very much work in progress, if you see any bugs with these objects, you can report them to Cycling. I will put a link in the description to where you can do that. And also, I want to point you to the fact that these objects are based on JavaScript. They're created using JavaScript. So if I double click here, for example, it will open the code in JavaScript, in Visual Studio Code in this case. And this is possible through a Max9 feature, which is called MFI objects, which stands for Meta Features Instances, Meta Feature Instances, I believe, which is the same systems that the JitFX objects also use, like JitFX Blur. This allows you basically to create a JavaScript object or shader files and transform them in actual Max objects with attributes and autocomplete, and you can create them by name. So that's a very cool thing introduced in Max9, and we will talk more about that in the future. So for the moment, I will leave you as this. My baby is crying in the background, so this always makes me kind of a bit nervous. So I will go now, but you can get this patch on my Patreon, and if you join, you will also support the channel and the creation of these videos, so very much appreciated. Big shout out to all my existing patrons and the past ones, which made my videos possible. In any case, I hope this is interesting. This is kind of stimulates your fantasy on how you can use these objects for your own artistic work and installations and patches. And so I will see you in the next year. Have a nice beginning of 2025. Stay safe, have fun, and keep patching. And I will see you then. Ciao.